The weak glow of the neon sign flicked into the dark sky as Terrence parked his dusty pickup in front of Elliott's Tipplo, a bar directly on North Carolina's Highway 74. The bar was nothing special, with locals, truckers, and souls walking into the streets looking for cold drinks and quiet corners. Returning from surgery a week ago, Terrence wanted to relax before returning to the requirements of daily life. Terrence opened the creaking door and intervened, greeted by the sum of the chatty shaft and the old jukebox that Johnny Cash had played. He searched the room and recorded the usual amount. Several patrons performed the group laughing at the pool, at the bar, and several lonely people drinking beer in silence. He didn't come here to find friends, just to thaw. He found a hidden corner table near his back, but he was clearly visible in the room. His camouflage uniform blends with a dark atmosphere, not a look chosen for comfort, except for sneakers worn on foot shoes. Terrence ordered a glass of water and kept it quiet. His thoughts lie in the family. His mother cooked, and his niece's excited voice was everything he could think of. The door opened and smashed his dream. A group of 6 men entered, their heavy boots echoing across the wooden floor. They were old, their leather jackets were dirty, and the insignia told the world that they were veterans. They headed for the bar and they laughed, slapped on the back. Terrence looked at them before returning to his drink. But one of the men simply didn't come back. The top-class man with a salted pole-coat beard and permeated eyes froze his laughter. He tweeted something to his group, and they all started watching. Her laugh calmed down, replacing the boiling tension that slowly filled the room. Terrence felt their eyes, but they didn't recognize them. He experienced this kind of view in front of those who attacked them and judged them without context. He sipped water and tried to focus on the jukebox rather than the discomfort that seemed to be dressed in the air. The group approached at the bar, and although their voices were low, they showed. The stubborn leader whispered something, and the other laughed, giving him a wonderful view of Terrence. Terrence stayed calm and his attitude relaxed, but his senses became sharper. He had long ago learned that he remained composed under pressure lessons from years of service. Despite this, the weight of her eyes was not noticed. The night that began as a simple escape was shortly before a turn Terrence hadn't expected. Jukebox Ham owned to heavy boots when a group of men headed to the Terrence table. Her leader, a band-shaped man with a beard of salt and pepper, was in front of him, his eyes closed as falcons. Terrence felt a shift before the energy reached it. Once filled with casual chatter, the room has become remarkably calm. The bartenders made the center of the pour, and the regular guests looked at the group with careful eyes. Terrence took off his glass and leaned back a bit. His gentle appearance hid a calm alert from his muscles. "Hey." I stopped just a few meters from Terrence, with my leader, Berkta. His voice was loud, plentiful of pebbles, covered with light, emptying edges. "Beautiful uniforms you have there. Where can I get it from my Halloween store?" The man laughed behind him, and she laughed with a ridiculous laugh. Terrence looked up, his expression steady. "He heard something a little bad," I answered evenly. "Get it?" The guide raised his eyebrows and deceived his surprise. "That's right, right? This is interesting, as I have seen many real soldiers, and none of them wear their tired sneakers. You try to make yourself for sympathy or maybe a free drink." Terrence Pine pulled slightly, but his voice stayed. "No sympathy or free drinks are required. I'm here to enjoy my night." Leader's lips rolled into a smirk as he calmed down and Beer's breath tensed. "You don't look like a soldier to me," he chuckles. "Where are your boots? Your tag? In hell, you probably don't even know how to properly greet them," one of the men behind him added. "He couldn't tell us the first thing about basic training. Another interference is probably never seen in his life." The group erupted again with laughter, their voices flowing against the low jukeboxes. Terrence was silent, his eyes moving between the men. He was not threatened, but he didn't want to incite the flames. His years on duty taught him how to choose his battle. However, this encounter involves rubbing it raw. It wasn't just her words. It was boldness, ignorance. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Terrence said, his voice calm and hard. Now, the leader, visibly annoyed by Terrence's tranquility, was even closer, and his big frame was protruding. "You think you're a kind of hero, right? Do you go here because you belong? I don't think you're doing that." The room seemed to hold his breath. Terrence met the unwavering man. "I offered 3 tours abroad," he said. His voice was stable, but edge was wearing it. The laughter ended for a while. The guide hesitated, and his courage met Terrence's weight. But he did not leave him proudly. Instead, he chuckled. "Yes, we provide it. Please show me the tag. Otherwise, they are nothing but liars." Terrence's eyes flickered at the others in the group, noticing their restless looks. They were now convinced of the leader's allegations, but no one dared to comment. He breathed slowly and opposed the urge to escalate. "I have not borrowed evidence from you," he said. "But if you think you're starting something here, I'm a good idea, and I suggest you think again." The tension in the room was noticeable. The bartender's hand hovered near the phone and was ready to call help. The other patrons moved to their seats, their eyes showering between Terrence and the group. Still, the leader didn't move. Instead, his smirk returned sharper and more generally than before. "You got a clever mouth," he said. His voice is low and threatening. "Make sure it's as fast as your fist." The moment hangs in the air, tight like a wire ready for snaps. A smirk tumbled deeper as he fell forward and reached for Terrence's collar. His movements were both troublesome and brave than skill-driven, but it was enough to move everything. Terrence didn't think he had responded. Years of training began, and with quick and accurate movements, he was exposed to the grave and caught his wrist in the middle of the air. With liquid movements, Terrence twisted his arm behind the man's back, using his weight to push him forward, placing it in front of him with his face on the other side of the table. The leader pushed out a strangled cry of pain, quickly evaporating his courage. Paul muttered in breath as the rest of the bikers froze, their big eyes staring at the unmoving leader. No one has moved a bit. Terrence is a low, controlled, yet unmistakable authority, setting his voice through a surprising silence. "I said you should think carefully before I start anything. Who is ashamed of herself?" The guide fought Terrence, but it was of no use. The gentle efficiency of the soldiers left no room for error or escape. From the whole room, one of the bikers hesitantly took a step forward. His hands grew up in half-minded attempts to intervene. "Hey, man," he stammered. "Let him go. He didn't mean that." Terrence looked up, his eyes closed the man. "He came near me. You saw it." His voice was steady and immovable from the chaos surrounding him. "If you want to have it for free, tell him that he should settle first." The bartender, quietly staring at his cell phone in his hand, finally spoke. "Maybe it's time for you all before this gets worse." However, as one of his friends called him, the leader was not ready to go back completely. Even if his arms twist and his face presses against the table, he thrusts his fitted teeth into him and calls the bull. "This guy just attacked me. He wears the wrong uniform and I want him to be arrested." Terrence let him free with controlled thrust, and Hank stumbled and clung to his arm as he turned to send the soldiers. They are paid for how he groans and for his tone to drip with malicious intentions. The remaining bikers gathered behind him and were erupted by minors perceived against their guides. One of them pulled out the phone and chose the 911 with his trembling hands. "Yes, we had a man who spent the soldiers here," he said. His voice can be heard loudly in the bar. "And he attacked only my friend." Terrence stood still, his expression calming down, but his spirit competed. He knew how it looked, and he knew how quickly things would lose control. But he also knew that he had done nothing wrong. His years of service, his victims, everything he stood, will hold everything against her unfounded allegations. He just had to stay calm. The bar now lives in tweets, and guests whispered and threw side angles into the area. Some of them seemed restless, but others seemed implicitly impressed just how easy he had dealt with the situation. But no one happened to know what had happened. Outside, the sound of approaching sirens passes through the tense air. Red and blue lights flash through the bar window, pouring shade into the room. The police have arrived. The door shook, and two officers stepped into the bar. The other was a woman with sharp traits and gentle, attentive behavior. Her presence to be silent soon silenced the room as all eyes turned to them. We received a call for debate and said his voice was steady but solid. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Hank, clutching his wrists and still red-faced from the encounter, spoke first. He showed off the angular finger horns. "This type attacked me, and he pretended to be a soldier. Look at him. He doesn't even have real boots." The officer's gaze shifted Terrence. He stood quietly at his table, and his attitude relaxed, but wary. "Is that true?" Terrence shook his head slowly, hitting the policeman's eye. "No, sir. This guy and his friends stood up to me because they didn't believe they were real soldiers. When he tried to grab me, I defended myself." A female officer appeared and her eyes searched for the room. "Have anyone seen what happened?" The bartender spoke, breaking the tense silence. "I saw it." Hank followed him first. This soldier was responding to protect himself. It was not an attack. Tweets about contracts by room. The patron saint near the jukebox added. The male officer turned again. "Is there any evidence of your service?" Terrence nodded and measured her movement as she stayed on the floor of the table. "With this bag, I got a service uniform under my name and rank. There is also an ID and a wallet. You are welcome to see it." The officer picked up the bag, opened it carefully, and undressed his neatly folded uniform decorated with badges and insignias. He briefly inspected it before turning to his partner, who nodded his quiet confirmation. "You're clear," he said, his voice, but with respect. "We appreciate your cooperation." Hank, who was still growing his pride after being injured, groaned. "Are you just taking his words?" He could have imagined it all. The female officer shot a sharp look. "Sufficient. After what I heard, they created this, and they are fortunate that he has not accused them of the assault." The words hit Hank like a blow, and his anxiety began to empty. Other bikers move uncomfortably and avoid eye contact with people in the room. "That's how it works," the male officer continued. "Enter a report on this incident. If you want to get into your point, you should be willing to do so. However, you need to know that false accusations are serious issues." Hank replied with an open mouth, but then closed it again and realized he was in tension. Officials resigned and scanned the room one last time when tensions were allowed. The female officer turned to Terrence. "Thank you for keeping me cool. Make sure this is correctly documented." Terrence nodded to her slightly, his tranquility unshakable. "Thank you, officer." The bikers mixed with the bar, and their previous courage was replaced by an unpleasant silence. Still angry, Hank stared at Terrence last before disappearing through the door. The officials followed immediately afterwards, leaving the bar and slowly returned to normal conversation. Terrence sat down again, his drink untouched. The weight of the encounter remained, but he was relieved that it hadn't escalated anymore. The other patrons whispered around him, stealing his direction and paying their previous attention through quiet respect. A few days later, Terrence worked on his old pickup at the entrance to his small home on the outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The late afternoon sun cast a long shadow over the courtyard while he held the bolts under the hood. The memory of the incident at the bar was not because of conflict he had been exacerbated in the struggle, but because of what it was. It wasn't the first time anyone misjudged him, and he suspected it would be the last one. The sound of the tires groan in gravel pulled him away from his thoughts. He straightened, wiped his hands on the rags, and turned the bike towards the entrance. The driver was one of the men at the bar, a wily man with thin hair, a leather jacket that was too big in two sizes. Terrence recognizes him as Bill, one of Hanks's crew. Bill cut off the engine and got off, removed the helmet, hesitated for a while before approaching. His attitude was almost apologetic and cautious, as if he was approaching a stray dog he didn't want to scare. "Terrence, is that so?" "Bill," his voice asked calmly. Terrence nodded, but he didn't speak to him and waited to see where it had gone. Bill cleaned his throat and put his hands in his jacket bag. "I wanted to come and say, sorry what happened at the bar." Terrence raised his eyebrows, surprised but not completely convinced. "They were part of it," he said evenly. Bill nodded, his face washed away with guilt. "No, I didn't stop it, and I should have done it. Hank. He had a way to demolish people, and I went with me. But it doesn't make it right. I've been thinking about it ever since, but I just wanted to tell you." Terrence studied Bill for a moment. The man's discomfort was clear, but his sincerity was also clear. "Why now?" Bill shrugged his armpits and looked down at his boots. "Because that's correct, and because we clearly realized how wrong we are. You deserve nothing." Terrence didn't say anything for a long time. He then sighed, leaning against the truck and crossing his arms. "Bill, what do you want from me? Forgiveness?" Bill looked up, his eyes turned seriously. "Perhaps. But more than that, I just want to be better. I have seen a lot of hatred in my life, and I don't want to contribute to it anymore. What we did was wrong, so I have to own it." Terrence's expression has been slightly softer. He was apologizing to the real thing, some hollow. This felt differently, not for words, but for the effort to get the bill to come into full. "I think you're coming here," Terrence finally said. "It doesn't delete what happened, but it's the beginning." Bill nodded to his face, reassuring. "Thank you, man. I'm serious." When Bill rode his bike and started the engine, Terrence saw him and felt a strange mix of emotions. The incident at the bar was an ugly memory of the prejudice he still faced, but Bill's apology was a faint thing of hope, a small but meaningful step to understanding. Terrence returned to the truck and wiped his hands again as he thought up what had unfolded over the past few days. He knew that his battle with ignorance was not over, but he also knew that he was not alone. Just as he wore himself, the decisions he made allowed him to change perspective after perspective. The evening air was calm when he finished work, the calm of Zikaden's distant total. Not only did Terrence feel a sense of determination to move himself forward, but he also felt that he would place the world with the same strength and integrity that brought him through his service. Sometimes the fights were not fought overseas. Sometimes they were fought in the hearts, in the bars, in the houses. And as far as Terrence is concerned, these fights were just as important.